And we're live because I completely forgot to start the banner thing. It's not like I'm flustered at all. Can you tell? So this is our fancy countdown. And then we got the machine running, and then Matt's marrowing a patch, and then the picture changing the needle, and
all the good stuff.
I mean, you guys get all that good stuff because, well, I just hit the go live button. Oh, and then I put my face in my lights. So this is gonna be a fun show. We have Jesse checking in. Hello, Jesse. And today we have a Digitizing 911. Wait, I can do that one. No, I can't. I don't see it. So apparently I don't know where our Digitizing 911 banner is, so we'll just pretend that that's not a thing. Oh wait, it's under this one. It is. It's Digitizing 911.
There it is.
We had a user submission, and Justin, I believe, do you have a picture of the actual sew out?
I can get it.
Well, now it sounds like me. So we had a user submitted file. Justin has gotten a wonderful hatch, and they're using hatch, correct?
That is correct. So I am using hatch today. So if I'm a little bit slow, that's the reason why.
I'm super excited for this live. I just want you all to know that. But I will go ahead. I've got my E4.5 open, and we'll get the art up here at least so we can see what we're working with. So this was a user submission. I believe they were having problems with, primarily lettering, right? Because that's...
Yeah, the biggest concern was definitely the small text involved. Let me actually pull up their sample really quick.
So now I find this interesting because I when I look at this file, it looks like it was a DST file that was pulled in and saved as an EMB.
Okay, so if there's a second file I sent you that looks like it is a true EMB, I was noticing that he made some changes. As you can see, the sample of top and bottom, he had made some changes, and it looks like the first file for some reason was saved as a DST, and then the second file is a true EMB file. So if you are looking at that or working with it in Wacom, Jeff, he's having some difficulties today, so we just lost him. But as you can see, the small lettering is the main concern that this customer had, or this viewer had. But we're going to go ahead and just go through the whole design and show some digitizing approaches that we would do. It does look like there was change as far as the size of the text from the first and second sew out. That's one of the things I was going to suggest for sure. Was adjusting the design so it would work for embroidery, because you are working with a small serif font at a very, very small size. So right off the bat, you are kind of fighting against yourself with this particular design. But these are the sew-outs that we are actually discussing in Discord, where he was talking to a bunch of us, trying to get some pointers. So I will go ahead and get my hatch pulled up while Jeff is trying to join us again. And before we start, we have some people saying hello. We have Letty saying hi, guys, and there's Jeff again. We have Ben, and this is his project. So thanks for joining us, Ben, and hopefully we can help you out today. Ramona is in saying hello. And we've got Mike from the nerd from up north. And Frank from across the pond. You all good now, Jeff?
We'll find out.
For now.
At least the next 5 minutes until it decides to have a chronic heart failure again. It's been fine all day too. Literally, have not had a single problem. Go live, and then it just starts dying all over the place.
Of course.
I blame StreamYard.
So, StreamYard. All right,
Yeah.
we can do that. All right, so this is the one of the original files. This is the one that actually is. It looks like it is a ENB file, which I think this was the original one. And right off the bat, like I was saying, when we were looking at the sample, I could see right off the bat the main concern that Ben was having was the small text. And selecting that text here, looking at the size, you're looking at 3.75 millimeters tall. So right off the bat, working with text that small can be very, very difficult. And then throw into that you're working with a pretty thin serif font, it's definitely going to be a problem. Do you suggest doing size text that style and that size there, Jeff?
Do I have a suggested size? A lot bigger.
Yeah, a lot bigger, exactly. Personally, especially depending on what kind of garment, it looked like it was going on some type of flat from those samples. A couple of different things that I usually do is right off the bat is tell the customer as far as the restrictions or the complications that go on with lettering this small as it is. But maybe discussing either changing the font to something that's a little bit more basic, bold block font, which typically can go a little bit smaller. But if they are wanting to keep the general idea of this design, I would probably suggest kind of enlarging it and opening it up and maybe shorten these two lines on the sides just so you can make room to make that text a little bit better. I know right off the bat when you tell people when you approach them that you want to change their design on them, and there's a little pushback because they don't want their design changed. But I think in the end, when you see a design that sews a lot more clean and it looks better to the eye, the changes the modifications that you have to make to a design kind of outweigh it not looking very good, trying to keep the design exactly the proportions that they originally had it in.
So I know just looking at the file, because I was just measuring some things here, it looks like the shortest stitch in the lettering is about 0.65 millimeters. And that would be the return, including the pull compensation on each stitch. So when your stitches are running that short, you're going to have a lot of difficulties. The shortest stitch that I would consider doing that's not a lock stitch runs about 1 millimeter, and I actually like to go to 1.2 to give the thread a little bit of room to pull in. And so it's going to be,
Yep. So coming in here and measuring the smallest stitches, like, the widest stitch of the C, it does make that 1 millimeter mark. But if you start going in here and you start measuring the smallest stitches, they're almost a 0.5 millimeter wide. So that's where the main concern is going to be, where you're not going to have that quality satin stitch. Lettering this small, to tell you the truth, when there's a design that there's lettering, that it's almost like one of those things where the lettering has to be there and there's no room to scale it up. Typically I go to a running stitch lettering in that case. And again, it's not going to be the most legible thing, but it's one of those things where, like, if it's a corporate design or there's, certain rules to the design where something has to be there and there's no changes available, something this small, I would go to a running stitch, which in the bigger scope of things, a design that's kind of open, lettering at the bottom, I don't think that would look very clean. So I think the way I would approach this is definitely opening this up, making these lines smaller on the sides, and that way we can make the word construction a little bit bigger.
Yeah. I mean, I would almost enlarge the center text too and drop those lines down, because really in that logo, the CBA and the construction is what they want to convey. And I mean, looking at that logo, that's just kind of small comparative overall to the whole logo.
Right. And yeah, and there's definitely different ways that you can talk to your customer and say, hey, to make this design so cleanly, here's some changes. There, you can shorten up those those lines in the side in order to enlarge construction. You can move up those lines maybe so they're over here, and that way construction has that whole area to be enlarged. Talk about removing the lines completely. There's different scenarios as long as they're aware that some modifications have to be done, and they're okay with that, just to make sure that the end result, the end sew out is going to be a lot cleaner than what the results you're getting.
Yep, and I mean, Doug asks a question here of how much would using 60 weight thread help? And really, from the test photos that I saw on the garment that it was going on, I don't think 60 weight would help that much, because the stitches are narrow enough that it's starting to collapse into the weave of the garment.
Mm-hmm.
Where if he was running on like a tightly woven twill or a hat, it would help quite a bit. But when you start going on to those heavier weave garments, it's gonna still sink in.
Correct. Yeah, and there's times where if it is feasible to kind of get that text at a small size where you're kind of measuring, that's why I was suggesting going to kind of a bold basic block, because sans serif blocks tend to have the same thickness throughout the letters. They're not going to have narrow areas like you see at the corners or the little ends of these C's or coming around curves. Those really small areas are going to be the ones that are going to be posing the most problems. You're going to get a lot of thread breaks, possible needle breaks, and just the overall look of the design or the look of the text is going to be definitely not as clean as you want it to be. Trying to find density here.
It's under fill.
Under fill. Thank you. So it's set on auto spacing, which I'm not sure what the values of auto spacing is on the hatch. So
the values are going to be similar to what E4.5 defaults at, but unfortunately with hatch you cannot see actually what those are set at.
Oh, the auto spacing, like when it's set to 80% or whatever.
Yeah, and you can't see that in hatch. Where in E4.5 you can actually drill down and look at those values and change them.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, that's definitely looking at this. Oh, those are fills, but looking at the satin stitches that he has throughout here, there are some that are set to manual. If you are working with smaller text, any type of smaller text, I would definitely go to manual stitching. That way you can control the density involved when you're stitching small lettering. Because like similar to Jeff's 30-minute live yesterday, he was talking about small text. You actually want to reduce your density and have a higher density when you're working with stitches in a smaller area.
Isn't it a lighter density in a smaller area?
Yeah, reducing your density, a lighter density, yes.
Okay, because you just said that backwards. I'm with you.
Yeah, so you're actually going to use less density in a smaller area. You have the thickness of the thread actually gives you some coverage, so you don't have to try to smash so many stitches in such a small area to get coverage. Zooming in and kind of seeing it on screen, it does look light, but when sewn out, that's going to definitely help you out. But overall, I think we need to go with the changes that we're discussing as far as to get that text larger. And Ben does have a comment here.
I changed the density many times over on some objects, but not all. Got a little overwhelmed and lost my place. And that it can get easy to get overwhelmed when you're trying to diagnose a problem and you're not quite sure where. Yeah. Especially in a lot of objects, you start changing a lot of things and then you forget what you changed and where you changed it and when you need to change back. So it happens to all of us.
Yeah. So just overall, just kind of done a quick glance at the design and some of the things that I'm going to kind of show as far as what changes we can make. Having little small elements here that are fill stitches. I know this shape here is a fill stitch, so changing the smaller elements to satin stitches is definitely going to help the things being a little bit more straight and not as lopsided as in the sew out that we saw. I know the other file that we did look here, there was some changes like that made. As far as like the angles on the satin stitches, they're a little bit weird. I know that happens a lot if you are, I'm not sure if that you did use the quote unquote auto digitizing functions on these things where you actually could use the vector art, select a piece of your art, say satin stitches. Sometimes the computer's going to kind of give it some weird angles. So
Well,
digitizing
and
may,
like you have here, when you go to straight convert that to a satin, it's just going to
that
give it that default stitch angle, which is what it
yeah,
looks
that's yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. The fact that you started with a satin stitch, if you do, I mean, fill stitch, if you do switch it to a satin, it's gonna stay. Uh,
like. Keyboard
Forgive
shortcuts
me.
are the same.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
keyboard
So
shortcuts are the same.
the angle there, that 39-degree angle, is gonna stay the same. So I think that's where it went when you made those adjustments there. So I will go ahead and pull it in. I have the artwork here, and I was just kind of starting here with these center objects. All right, let me get my bearings, people. Sorry. Um, just here, I started with the center things, these little window, I guess it's a window here. Uh, Paying attention to the start and stop points as far as my satins. These two elements here are pretty close together, so I ended here at the top, started the next one right next to it. So there's just a jump instead of a trim, and you can see.
No, I'm genuinely curious because now I'm curious. Hatch uses the use closest join feature. It's turned
Oh, it
on by
does.
default. Do you use that at all, or do you typically turn that off and just set it manually?
I turn it off only because I have found that, like, if I have two elements in WillCom 4.5, if I have two elements, like say a satin that's coming in, it's going to be tucked up underneath another element. And if I turn closest join on, instead of it ending at the very end of the satin, it will, where those two elements intersect, it'll put the start and stop points there. So it actually will sew and run back on itself. And I've just seen where if there's going to be a design that has any problems, like a thread break that's always at the weird spot, sewing a satin, having it stop, jump to the end of it, and come back. Sometimes it just adds like these weird short stitches. So I don't like how that does that. I wish it would just, like, if you have an endpoint on the element and you said closest join, it would just put the start point of that next element where you ended. But
Instead of
yeah, I
doing
didn't.
both of them.
Yeah, I didn't know Hatch had that kind of built
Yeah,
in.
that I
So
was wondering if you turned it off or your start and stop points moved on you a little bit.
I just, when I was digitizing it, I moved them over. So I guess just by habit. Um, Things like this where you see in digitizing on screen where you may not follow exactly the shape that you see in the artwork. This little space, if you zoom this out to the size that you're actually going to have that design, those spaces there are going to be pretty much non-existent when you actually sew it out with the push and pull of your thread. So you definitely want to overcompensate, because once these sew, these are going to push this way, this is going to push down. So, and these are going to pull apart. So this gap will actually increase and this one will decrease once these push out. So let me find my tools here to make sure that I am working correctly. Yes. So just using the point counterpoint, I'm going to do this little shape here in the satin stitch. Can you do copy copy settings? Can you do that on here?
Yeah, I have to remember where it's at. I think it might be under edit
Oh,
objects. Yeah, there you go.
it's under the right click. There we go. So if you have a setting here, like this setting, this particular object is 2.3 millimeters wide by 2 tall. So I have it at a 0.38 millimeter density setting. I have a center run underlay and a pull comp of 0.2. It's kind of a generic starting point that I use in satin stitches that tend to work when you're not getting into really, really thin satins or really, really wide satins. These are pretty average satins, so that's what I'm using instead of using auto spacing. So I did right click, copy, right click, apply, and that's going to apply the same settings, and that way you're working with the same settings throughout. One of the things I saw here that I know that was changed as far as using satin stitches on the skinnier parts and fill stitches on the wider parts, which I think is going to give it a good look. So if Ben is still in the comments, is this going on flats only, or is it just is it going on hats as well? So just because I would approach this a little bit differently if it was going on hats.
Yeah, I'll let you know when he chimes in.
Okay. So this leg of it here is going to be a satin stitch. So again, I'm going to go ahead and kind of tuck the satin down in here. Typically, I try to keep things as far as the angle points. The angles of the satin, they're going to be the same. If you come down and plot points like coming down and start doing where the angle changes as you're going down. Oops. As you can see, the angles are changing throughout, and it's going to kind of give it a weird wavy look to it.
So Ben says just flats, polos, and hoodies.
Okay. Start over there. So I've noticed that in Wacom, when you copy properties like that and you go onto digitizing the same tool, it'll hold on to those values. I just digitize this and it'll look like it went to default. So you could, as you digitize, you can apply your object properties just to make sure that you don't forget that you've done it, or sometimes you can just digitize everything and go back and change all the values to each of the elements one by one, or you can group them and set all the values at the same time. Let's see. Is this?
You're in digitized blocks.
Ah, that's why. Is it a closed shape for fills?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, again, not too familiar with Hatch, so I'm not sure of the tools to use.
At least the keyboard shortcuts are the same. That helps, right?
Yes, it does. So again, start and stop points. I have the satin tucked up underneath the fill right here. I am going to stop short and just to make sure that this satin doesn't push out past that fill. And yeah, you're right, that start and stop, auto start and stop was there, because see how these two meet right here? This fill and this satin, the default was stopping down here.
Yep. And you can change that. Just so we can show it, if you go into your software settings up there at the top, Justin, and user manage settings, I believe. It's one of those. I can't see them. Yeah, I think so. And you've got your crosshair cursor, and I want to say it's on one of those. Maybe it's the other setting screen.
Apply closest showing when digitizing.
Yep, there you go. So that's where you guys can shut that off if you want to.
Yeah, I prefer turning that off. So just so I can, again, I think the human brain having a little bit more control over what's going on is a little bit better than what the computer chooses. So
Well, and one of the things too with that is if you go and you set your start and your stop point and then you edit a node, it's going to apply that closest join and it's going to move it back to where it was. And then you set it again,
Exactly.
and then anytime you move a node, it's going to set it back. And I mean, that's why I don't run it, because it drove me absolutely up the wall because it kept moving it.
Exactly. So what's digitize
Open shape.
running stitches? Open shape?
Yep.
Okay. Single run. So I'm going to go walk back over here. I'll go back up to, is the way that the elements are tucked up underneath the, if you're looking at the front of the house, you can use that depth where it looks like elements are behind other elements like it is in real life. So walk it up there, which typically I do stitch length of about 3 when I'm just traveling and it's not stitching where you're going to see it, where it's just going to be going up underneath the embroidery. I'm going to go ahead and copy this over. If you select elements, you can hit shift and click on the second element and it'll select both elements. And then if you right click and hold, it'll copy them as you drag them. And I'm going to mirror that, move it over here. Just a little shortcut so you're not digitizing things over and over again when they're the same element. Again, so digitizing blocks, is that anytime that you're doing the point counterpoint like on satins? Okay.
Yep.
So
that would be what your column B tool in Wilcom.
Column B. When you're digitizing as well, if you hold down Control, it'll keep your node on that plane, on that horizontal or vertical plane. Just kind of helps you with straight lines. Interrupt me if there's any comments or questions there, Jeff.
Ben says that run stitch connector is awesome. I always forget to utilize things like that. I've got it on comment. It is.
Yeah.
It's something that you want to think about when you're looking at a design. You want to plan, I'm going to do this element, then this element, and then how can I chain these together to optimize it when it runs on the machine.
Yeah. Best case scenario is that machine needs to have its needle down no matter what. If you're forced to trim, like some people like trimming every single letter, just really quick, as I was digitizing, of course it is going to do the angle at the angles that I digitize those nodes, but also coming around curves, it's sometimes going to add some additional angles in there. And sometimes they can kind of get weird. I typically, when it's a tight corner, I try to come in here and make that transition into the curve a little bit more smooth. And that way you don't have these kind of weird stitches that are going to kind of run into each other and kind of create this separation on the outside of that curve.
Yeah.
What were we saying? Oh, as far as keeping your needle down, trimming takes time. It's it's going to add, if there's a ton of trims in your design, it's going to leave a bunch of tails on the backside of your embroidery. It's going to add time to your run. So if you can definitely use any travel stitches, running stitches, that's why I use a longer stitch length, less stitches in the design, a little bit quicker as far as getting to point A to point B. But running stitch is going to be a lot quicker than just having your machine trim, change position, go to the next position and start sewing.
Yeah. So Justin, we have a question about the point counterpoint or the digitizing blocks. If you could explain how that works when you're placing nodes, that would be great.
So point counterpoint, when you're doing a satin, you're going to have a left and right side or top and bottom side. So point counterpoint is, I'll go ahead and redo this. Point counterpoint is when you choose one side of it. I'm going to choose my satin tool. So it's going to be left side, right side, or top and bottom. And then you alternate left side, right side, right side. Because that's what, and every time, as you can see, as you're plotting those points, as you're dragging it, it'll actually give you that angle line that you're going to be using which is going to apply to that satin, is going to be the angle you're using. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a preview of where the angles are going to go. So it's point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint, and so on and so forth.
Kind of like a ladder. You do the rungs as you go along, left side, right side.
Exactly.
Ramona says those tails on the back, they can twist up and tangle in bird's nest when you got too many knots together. And we have a question of why would you guys use water-soluble topping for small text on polos?
It can help.
It can help.
I'm in the kind of thinking, digitize it correctly for the garment correctly, and you don't have to use an extra step like that. It's extra expense in the materials, and it's extra time as far as the cleanup.
Yep, and that's really where it comes for me. Is I if I can avoid having to do the cleanup at all with water soluble, I will do it that way versus put it and then have to wash it and wait for it to dry before I can throw it on the next. Yeah, and just rather not use it.
Exactly. So those settings that I was copying and pasting to these satins and whatnot, this satin I recognize that it is a little bit wider than the other ones. So this one's closer to almost 4.5 wide at its widest point. So just a center walk running stitch, and when you're getting over 4 millimeters is typically not enough. I would even go to your density and bump it up just a little bit. 0.36 might be helpful. What underlay do you usually use on a satin that wide, Jeff?
On a satin that wide, I'll go with like a center and a zigzag, or what do they call it, parallel zigzag. It depending on the garment, I'll do an edge run. It really comes into what knit I'm going on and how thick it is.
Right. I think I closed off that sample. Let's do a zigzag and an edge run.
So, I've got a comment. Ramona likes to use topper with small text because the left to right stitch can sink down into the dips in the knit. And then Mr. Muldowney says, what do you like for underlay under narrow satins? I've been using a center run with a short stitch length, but it still likes to peek out at the end of some shapes, like those taper points.
Unfortunately, yeah. The way to go if you are using a computer-generated underlay, it's a center run with a short stitch length. The short stitch length is just to ensure that it's not peeking out. When you have a wider stitch length and it is sewing that satin over, sometimes that wide stitch, as far as the underlay, may peek out a little bit. The only way around that is to kind of digitize it manually if there is a certain area that it's not performing well as far as the computer generated underlay. But center walk, short stitch length is the way to go.
All right. And Ramona says that she likes to use an edge run with a zigzag over 3 millimeter for flats.
That's typically what I go to do. That's what I set it on. One other thing I did see as far as the serifs, especially on the smaller lettering, I think it is kind of heavy as far as the amount of thickness that you're using for those serifs. You got to remember that the ends of those satins are going to push out this way, so you don't necessarily have to have the whole letter digitized. So you can, what's the saying? If it looks exactly right on screen, it's not going to be right on the machine.
Yeah,
you don't have to be.
What you see is not what you're going to get.
Exactly. You don't have to be so literal when it comes to especially serifs. You got to remember that's a real thin area that you're trying to jam a bunch of stitches in. it's gonna look thick, it's gonna look bulky, it's not gonna sew right, you get thread breaks. Um, Typically in smaller lettering like this, on bigger lettering, I'll actually use serifs where they're actually going to be their own individual satin portion where it's going to be perpendicular to the rest of the letter. Smaller letters like this, I'm going to use the same technique as far as what they did as having that open end of the satin, but I'm actually only going to throw out 2 points there and not try to get that thickness of the serif. And that way, when they're sewn, the serif actually is only going to be a couple stitches. Because once this pushes out, when sewn, it'll look like a thick serif. I'm going to go ahead and set my settings on the first letter so I know what I want it to be. I'm going to give it a 0.25 compensation just so to make sure that those thinner areas a little bit more pushed out a little bit more for compensating the small areas. Center run underlay, maybe a little bit shorter center walk, and the fill I'm going to go ahead and do a 0.38. I'm going to right click, copy object properties, and that way it'll be set for the other letters that I could apply it to. So I'm just kind of going through point counterpoint. And typically I was stopping on every element earlier and changing the endpoints and stuff. I usually kind of go through this and digitize everything, go back and set all my start and stop points. And as you're digitizing, a nice tool that this gives you does give you the thickness of your satin. So if I were to put it right on that artwork, it's at a 0.7. With your pull comp setting, it should probably put it above 1, but if you just kind of give it a little bit more width, it's going to definitely make it a little bit thicker for you. So if we measure these stitches here, yeah, those are almost at a 1.5 millimeter wide. So if I go through, we have a start and stop here. Start and stop there, line up the start and stop there. And I usually like just tuck in the areas that they're going to tie off. I typically tend to kind of find a spot where a satin stitch is coming in perpendicular inside the letter, because tie off stitches at the end sometimes can make that little blob or thicker area of your letter, and it seems to be a little bit more apparent. Keep forgetting that the hotkeys are the same. Another thing too that I use a lot in the lettering to make sure that the compensation that you're doing with a push and pull with letters is if you on the left and top area that you see the rulers, if you click in the ruler area and drag, it actually is going to give you a guideline. What I usually do on any letters that have the satins ending at the top and bottom facing up or down, you're going to have a push of that letter, like A's, I's, the bottom of a T, the top of an L. So I'll actually use these guidelines to even put it at the top of my letters that aren't going to push, and also guidelines for the letters that are going to push, and that way I can drag it in and know that across that whole word, every single one's going to stop at the top and bottom at the same height and bottom. And that way they're consistent. That's the word I'm looking for.
There you go.
So again, not trying to create this whole serif here. I'm just using a single stitch at that serif line to create that serif. There must be a setting off that they're not snapping to the guidelines, but I believe there's a setting that you can actually have your node snap to the guidelines, and that way you're not guessing. And going back, I'm going to apply my settings. Going back to the start and ends. Make sure those line up. And on serifs, if there isn't an area that there's kind of that inside, like the B that I kind of tucked it away in here, especially in serifs where that serif is relying on just a couple of stitches to create that serif, I don't want that lock stitch right at the end of the serif because this serif is going to be nice and flat, only having those couple stitches. So I kind of bring it back up in here, and that way when it's sewing, it'll come back and just throw those couple stitches down at that serif and tie in here. Hides the bulge a little bit more. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just digitize one of these sides at the size that they are now. And that way, once we make the adjustments to the text, we can manipulate these, move them, size them, whatever it is we're going to do with these. And so now, I'm going to unlock my art. Oh, I forgot these windows over here. Does this have resequence by selects or no?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Where's it at?
Under your sequence view. There you go, and then just right click and sequence by select. Or does it? Dun dun dun. Thought it did.
Oh no. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
Sequence by
there you
selection.
go.
So sequence by select, since I digitized this out of order, I'm going to select because I want to put these two windows after this, the main part of the house. So I select the house first, hold down Control. I'm going to select the next object that I want it to be in the sequence. Still holding down Control, you select the next object. In your object list, it's going to be highlighted with the big black box. And down here, the 1, 2, 3, you can see sequence by selection order. If you click that, now you can see in the selection it goes in the order that I told it to. I love that tool. I use it all the time. So now that we have the whole design digitized to the size that it needs to be, and the one element that we're going to want to make bigger, I'm going to go ahead and just select the art. Scale that up. Let's give a measurement to, these are just above 5 millimeters tall, which I think is a safe bet. These smaller areas are still a little bit too thin, but at that size, with your pull compensation and when you're digitizing those little areas, as long as you kind of overcompensate for those really thin areas, I think this is a good size that will work well with this particular font. So we planned on doing this design in a couple of different softwares, but
No, I think we're just doing it in Hatch.
yeah. So, which is good because that's the software that Ben has. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here again, creating this serif only by 2 points instead of several points, trying to get that big blocky serif. In these smaller areas, I am going to overcompensate where I'm going to make sure that my points are a little bit wider than what the art shows. And of course, we can come back and measure those once we're done. I'm going to set my guides to the push compensation of the letters to make sure that they're all at the same height. Computer's acting a little slow right now for some reason. Needs to catch up with my brain.
It's booting from the floppy disk.
From the floppy disk?
Yeah. The save icon. It's booting from the save icon.
My nodes are a little bit wonky because of the delay in the computer. Again, serif, 1 stitch, overcompensate in those little thin areas. Serif, 1 stitch. And one other thing, actually, I do want to address, and this is something that Ben's going to have to test out. But you can kind of get the gist of where I was going with the text, and I'll finish this out for Ben just so he has the completed file. But coming through here, measuring all these areas that were problem areas, they're over 1 millimeter, over 1 millimeter. And as long as you stay consistent throughout the whole thing, I believe Ben was trying to trim each letter, and he wasn't getting, even though the trim codes were in the software, his brother machine was not trimming. I have ran into this a couple times with a couple of customers that have brother machines. And Ben was telling me that he was just going as save as to a DST.
Mm-hmm.
And no, it's not a save as in Hatch, is it?
Export.
Export. So if you go to export to a DST, okay, there's not that many options on DSTs. Okay, the one thing that I found,
it was a brother.
It's a brother.
So
one thing.
Go ahead.
What's that? No,
you go ahead.
The one thing that I found in hold on, Ben's talking about the text. Don't know if trimming between letters is small good practice. It seems to like trimming would be better, be cleaner and more legible. This particular word at the size that we're doing it at now, if you want the trims to make it a little bit cleaner, if you're gonna trim it manually and you want it to look really clean and you don't want any evidence of that jump stitch over, there's a couple of different things you can do. You could either change your stop and end points. So, like for instance, if you change the endpoint here and you turn the trim off and you have your start point here, you're going to have that. Let me see if I can figure out how to turn the trim off.
I believe that's under stitching. and scroll down. There you go. Automatic trims.
Okay, so if you turn the trim off. Huh.
I don't think you had the object selected. No, you did.
I may not have a. Oh, there it is. Under true view, I guess you can't see it. But as you can see, that jump stitch is there. So if it ties off here and it jump stitch down here, this length of that stitch, that jump stitch between letters, is going to be a lot easier for your scissors to get into if you want that really clean, not connected look between your letters. So that's one option. Of course, the other option is to trim every single letter. So your machine's trimming every single letter. Another option too is, and again, this doesn't really, I know it was a dark red shirt with white lettering, so this option doesn't always work perfectly to the eye, but another thing you can do is if you do a closest point between these two letters, so if you're ending here and you're starting here, you can actually do a manual stitch here where it drops a stitch in between the letters and it kind of buries that stitch into the garment and then jumps to the next letter. But again, it's a little bit more apparent when you're working with white thread on a dark garment. So that may not be if you are looking for that really, really clean look where those letters aren't connected. So there's a couple of different options. When I finish this off, Ben, I'm going to go ahead and trim every letter just because I know that was something that you were looking to do and your software doesn't seem like it's talking to your machine properly. The one thing I did the only thing I could find in Hatch that's similar to Wilcom actually kind of gives you a machine setting where you could actually go in and choose a particular machine that the settings are for. I don't know exactly how it works or what settings it's changing when it exports it.
I think you can change that when you do the export. You actually export the file. If you're doing like a PES, you can change it. The versions.
The versions. It's not a version thing. It's all it is it's a machine setting where it drops down a list of machine manufacturers. And to tell you the truth, this particular customer that had a Brother machine, the combination that I found that made his machine trim was giving him a PES file under a Melco setting machine. I don't know why, but those are the things that I found. The only thing that I found on here that's closest to that setting in Wilcom, it's not exactly the same in Hatch, but if you go under Design Machine here and you do Transfer Design, this is actually going to give you a machine type that you could select. So I would select, it doesn't have Melco on this list. I would select Brother. I'm assuming you have a multi-needle machine, and then that actually will allow you to output it in a DST. I would try this first. This is probably your best bet for it to kind of give that coding language specifically to the Brother machine. Transfer settings. Oh, that's the same thing. That's just the setting. I guess you can set it on before you transfer it. So, but that's what I would try as far as to try to force those trims. So,
okay.
But let's see if you have any other questions. I know we're winding down here.
You can scroll back through.
And Ramon is saying Brother machines will use their own trim programming. Sometimes DST file instructions will carry over. Ben is saying things have to give these some more tests. Yeah, Brother, it seems like is the only one that. What type of file type were you opening in your machines? If it wasn't a DST.
Brothers can read PES and DST. I think those are the only two that those machines can read, though.
So maybe that transfer that I showed you as far as choosing a Brother machine under that, try it with a DST, try it with a PES, because like I said.
Yeah, he says he's using PES.
Yeah, that's the combination that I found that actually would allow trigger his trimmers on his machine. So yeah, maybe try DSTPS, try that machine transfer setting, and hopefully that takes care of it. But I'll go ahead and finish this design up for Ben tonight. Like I said, hopefully your customer's open to the adjustments as far as making that text larger. I'm going to probably just shorten up those lines in the side, and that way you can keep it all on the bottom line like it is in there. But if they don't like that, maybe, like I said, suggest moving those lines up to the size of the top text, gives you more room at that bottom for the construction to be a little bit bigger. And hopefully what we do here today is going to help out with those problems and those issues you're having with the design. And we would love to see a sew out of your finished product after you try this out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that brings us close. I mean, pretty close to on the hour. So that's really good. But we'll go ahead and close this out. We've got the DAX Kansas City shows coming up this weekend. And then after that, it's going to be the EEM market in Lafayette, Louisiana. So if you guys can attend a trade show, I highly recommend it. Other than that, that is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios, and I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. And we're both here representing the Embroidery Nerd. We'd like to thank you guys for your time, and we'll catch you next time.
Good night, guys.